Yeah, I know many of us feel betrayal since the Democrats were elected to leadership in the House and the Senate, uh, really on the basis of a rapidly changing public opinion against the war and a revulsion against the policies of the Bush administration. And yet, since they have taken the majority leadership of the House and the Senate and become the heads of committees and have been in a position to advance bold new agendas, they have not done so. They have not defunded the war. They have not moved to impeach Bush and Cheney. They have really surrendered to the power of the Bush administration. So they have betrayed the trust of the people. And in a situation like this, which by the way is not unexpected, that is, Democratic parties, which the liberal progressive public has always turned to as an alternative to conservative and hardline and militarist policies. Progressive liberal parties, the Democratic Party has again and again failed its constituency. And so this is not a different situation. And what it suggests to us is that we cannot place our faith in government, even a different government, even a slightly more liberal government. We cannot place our faith in the Democratic Party as opposed to the Republican Party. We can only place our faith in the actions of people. And in fact, the history of the United States, the history of the struggle for justice, is a history of the people themselves creating social movements outside the machinery of government, outside the party system, in order to bring about some modicum of social change. The abolitionists could not simply depend on the Republican Party and on Lincoln. They had to create a national movement against slavery, which then pushed Lincoln into the Emancipation Proclamation and pushed Congress into the 13th and 14th and 15th Amendments. And the labor movement has never been able to depend on the government to bring it the 8-hour day or a minimum wage. And the labor movement has had to engage in decades and decades of strikes and confrontations, and the sit-down strikes in the 1930s, facing off the police and the National Guard in order to change the conditions of working people. And more recently, we've seen how black people in the South, faced with the reluctance of the national government, even when led by the Democrats, even when led by John F. Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson, supposedly liberals, the black people of the South, faced with the reluctance of these so-called liberals to do anything about racial segregation in the South, had to take matters into their own hands, had to create a social movement which would galvanize the nation and which finally would push the president and Congress into action. Same thing happened during the war in Vietnam, where, again, we could not depend on Congress to defund the war. It's interesting, Congress did not defund the war in Vietnam until the war was really just about over. It was a movement, a popular movement of GIs, of priests, of nuns, of citizens, of middle-class people, working-class people, students. It was a broad movement that finally became powerful enough, acting outside the government, but acting on government, to finally help bring the war in Vietnam to an end. And that's the situation we face today. It's in a certain sense, it's a sobering lesson for all of us to realize that elections do not solve problems, that voting is just one small act in a myriad of acts which bring about social change. And the most crucial of acts in that package of acts that bring about social change, the most crucial is the work of citizens themselves, organizing, agitating, committing civil disobedience, protesting, using every possible means, gentle means like writing to your congressman, writing to your local newspaper, sitting in your congressman's office. I mean, today, with the Democratic leadership so inept, probably one of the most important things people can do is to go to their local representatives, their congressmen, their senator, the people they elected, the people they depended on to bring this war to an end. And stay there, refuse to move. Do what the black people did in the South when they refused to move from the stools of the Woolworth counter. And do what Martin Luther King did. Do what the workers did in the 1930s. They refused to move from the factories until the union was recognized. Go into the offices of the senators and congressmen, refuse to leave until they pledge to defund the war and bring the war to an end. So that this betrayal is also a challenge to the rest of us as citizens.